Does it feel harder to be the church than it did 10 years ago? Yeah, some of us might even say than it did a year ago. Yes, than it was a month ago. Yes. The book is about how to do evangelism without being weird. That's what the book's about. But you can't use the word evangelism in the United Methodist Church because nobody will read it. And it scares everybody, and it's kind of freaky to most people, and we haven't done it in 75 years. Now, you could fill in the blank with whatever program you were doing, whatever thing that gets people through your building, and mostly what we were thinking was if we were open 24/7 and a whole bunch of different people came through the building during the week, they would see how nice we were and give us a try on Sunday. Yes, does that sound familiar? And by the way, don't feel too bad about it. It worked for a time. I mean, honestly, that's how I built my new church in the 1990s. Put a great worship thing on Sunday morning, put a product on the stage, open up the door, be a community church, have all kinds of people come through the building. They'd see how nice we were. Come on Sunday, it's a good product. And it grew to 600 people. You couldn't do that today to save your soul. You could have a nice product on the stage. You could have great worship, great hospitality, all ready to go. You could have your door. People could even come through your building all week long, and there would be 30 to 40 of you on Sunday. Because that doesn't work anymore. So the first step you've got to start thinking about, no matter what you're doing at your church, whatever the event is that's drawing people you don't know, is how are you going to get their name? That has got to get into our psyche. In fact, if I were pastoring again today, I would not let our church plan an outward-focused event that didn't include how are we going to get their name. Are you going to get all their names? No, you can't even handle all their names. You just need to get some of their names. And then you got to ask the next question. How are we going to actually start a conversation with these folks? That's a whole different question yet. You can get names. Anybody done this? Ever got that list of names and go, now what? Now, the now what historically has been in the last 10 years, send them a postcard. Or a letter, lovely letter that nobody reads. Or if it's Vacation Bible School, I hate this. What'd you do to follow up with all the kids that came to Vacation Bible School? Oh, we put them on the newsletter, mailing list. Really? Are you just wanting them not to come again? Have you ever read your newsletter through the eyes of a 5-year-old? I mean, that's the follow-up? And then invite them to Christmas. That's what I always hear. We'll invite them to something for Christmas. Really? That's the deal? So what is it? First step is get their name. Second step is, so how are we going to start a conversation with these folks? Which would lead us to the step 3 that leads to a relationship. So if you don't hear anything I say all day long today, evangelism is about relationships more than it is evangelism. Are you with me? In fact, if you want to help people, your church is about how do we build new relationships with people. It isn't how do we go evangelize people. It's how do we go build new relationships with people. So if I get the list of names and I've even started a conversation, how is that going to lead us to having some longer-term relationships with some people we don't know? If you can't answer that question, I would say to your church, don't do the event. Now, church, we're not too good at that. We would like to just have the event and not do the rest. Because Methodists are really good at events. Even if they don't work. Even if we cry about we don't have enough volunteers. Even if it takes too much time. You just try to kill an event and see what happens to you. Can I get a witness? Yeah, there's a witness in the room. It's a funny thing with us, isn't it? All right, get their name, start a conversation. How's that going to develop into a relationship? So we'll come back. This is the key thing. If we can't figure out how to build new relationships with people we don't know, our church is going to die. And it should. And it should. The mission of the church is not fellowship. The mission of the church isn't just to be a building. The mission of the church is what? Do you know it? to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That means we have got to start relationships with people, have relationships with people we do not know. Now, the problem with most of our churches is they're aging in place, as I am. And the older you get, the smaller your circle of influence becomes. And in most of your church, if you would say, go start relationships with people you don't know, I already know the answer back. Do you know what they'll tell you? Everybody I know already goes to church. I used to think they were lying to me. I've concluded they were not. It was true. Everybody they knew. You see, the older you get, the smaller your circle gets. Right? So when I had little kids at home, my circle was a lot bigger. When Joe and Amy were in elementary school, guess what? I had all kinds of contacts as a pastor with the elementary school. Why? Because you had to. And when they got out of elementary school, I lost all those connections. And then in high school, you had a few less. And then in college, a few less. Gone from home, a few less. Are you with me? And if you found my mother, who's 77 in Sedea, and her world has just continued to shrink and shrink and shrink. Right? And so people do say, I don't know anybody that's not already here because this is my circle. And so it is hard to imagine, well, how do you step out of your circle? And you have to start helping people and imagine, what would that look like to step out of your circle into a circle you don't know? And for most of us, that's a really scary step, especially the older we are. It's so out of our custom to step into a circle of people, because most of us, if you're in church, say, I got plenty of friends, I don't need no more. We don't say that out loud, but our behavior says it. Right? So you got to figure a way to help us all step into some new relate. So at your church, it's a funny question. It's not a programmatic question, but how are you going to help your church, your people in your church, yourself, pastor you? If you're not careful, you'll hang out for the rest of your life with United Methodists. If you're not careful. And they will love it, and they will reward you for it if you take care of them, but your church will continue to die. You can be the best pastoral care pastor God ever invented, and people will love you, they will give you raises, pastor, and your church will continue to die. In fact, if you start stepping out of that into the other thing, the church will give you some grief. But if you don't, your church is going to continue to die. We got to find ways out of our circle into other circles. And pastors, if you're not practicing that, your laity are never going to practice it. They only practice what we model. Okay, so how do you build new relationships? Which leads to a moment, are you with me? Leads to a moment over here. Right, get back on your this is Wesleyan deal. It leads to a moment where my experience has been mostly the folks you've engaged with will ask you, why do you do what you do? Most of the time, you don't even have to ask them. They will ask you. They will try to figure out, why do you care so much? Why do you behave like this? Why are you so interested in me? And you need to be ready with your 3-minute faith story. Not your church selling story. Now, most of us were trained that right here, what we did in the mainline Protestant churches, let me tell you about my church. We have the greatest pastor. We have the best youth group. We have the best choir. We have the best building. Are you with me? We sold our church. That's what we did. And in the 60s, 70s, and even into the early 90s, that sort of worked. But today, I don't know if you've realized this, nobody gives a rip about your church. Nor are they interested in church. By the way, they're very interested in spiritual things. Every Gallup poll there is says that people are very spiritually interested, and they are not interested in church. And right here at this moment, if you answer with what you've been trained to answer with, which is, let me tell you about my church, what you just told that person was, don't come. What you need to answer with, let me tell you about my God. And we're going to come back to that. And we're not used to this, and United Methodists are not trained in sharing their faith story in 3 minutes or less. And I don't mean some weird thing. Just tell me where you've seen God at work this week in your life. That's what people want to hear. And if there's a signal from that somehow they're sitting there thinking, well, I want some of that. Because, see, most Americans still believe there is a God. What they're not sure about is, does it make any difference? And if it does, how? I want some of that. And then, and only then, by the way, once you have, got their name, started a conversation that led to a relationship, that led to a moment where you shared your faith, just then, maybe then, you can say, hey, would you like to come with me? Now, this is where Wesley was different. You see, in our Reformist brothers and sisters, right here is where they share the gospel. Are you with me? This is what we've been trained to see on TV. This is where we share the gospel. That's not what Wesley did, by the way. What Wesley did is, would you like to come with me? When he was in field preaching, coal mines, in the streets, he didn't try to save people in the streets. He would say, would you like to come with me? Say it with me. With me. You know how much easier it is to walk into your church with you than to say, oh, go down to my church? You know how hard it is to walk into most of our churches on Sunday morning? It's like walking into a family reunion. And though your family may be real nice and sweet, my family's nice, you're quirky, trust me. Every family is quirky. Especially yours, I'm positive of it. It's very quirky. And so when you walk into a family, if you were to walk into my family reunion Thanksgiving this year, we'd be nice to you, but you'd stick out. And there's no way around it. And you'd leave going, man, those Farrs are kind of weird, right? Because we're talking about all kinds of stories and things that you ain't never heard of, yes? And it was in the preaching house that Wesley would say, we'll let the Holy Spirit take it from there. Wesley wasn't worried about somehow us saving somebody. Let's get them to the preaching house, and we'll let the Holy Spirit take it from there. Because Wesley had this deep conviction that the Holy Spirit moves better in a group than individually. I mean, that's why we have, people say, well, the Methodists don't have altar calls. Yes, we do. It's called Holy Communion. The reason Wesley served Holy Communion every day, not only was it his tradition, but he believed that was a convicting, he wrote it was a convicting element. It was our call to be closest to God. And if you could just get somebody to the preaching house, preach the word, serve communion. Communion was our altar call. It was where people would come down and Wesley say, the envelope between earth and heaven gets the thinnest. That was our altar call. That's why he served it every time. That's why, by the way, our altar, our communion is not open to everybody just to be nice. It was open to everybody because Wesley believed that was the biggest chance the Holy Spirit would move and convict somebody. So how could it not be open to everybody? See the difference? That's the Wesleyan way of evangelism. It isn't street evangelism. It is street relationships that lead people back to the preaching house, that allows the Holy Spirit to move in a bigger group and be convicted through Holy Communion that God is real. Are you with me? Now, the sad thing about this is most United Methodists do not even know this. Did you? We have bought into the reformist idea that if we don't somehow, we take the burden on ourselves to somehow we got to save them, somehow we got to convert them, somehow we got to tell, and then we just shrink from that and go, whoa, I'm not doing that. I don't know enough. I'm not a real enough Christian. I don't know my Bible. I don't even carry my Bible. Are you with me? And so we do nothing. So let's go back. What is it? Get their name, that leads to that moves to a moment that has you, and bring them back with you to the preaching house, and we'll let the Holy Spirit take it from there.